This is the summary slide. So if you look up at the top, you'll see in purple the regulatory hormones from the hypothalamus, and they are going to directly control the anterior pituitary. For example, corticotropin releasing hormone controls the ACTH. Thyrotropin releasing hormone controls TSH, and so on. So that's not too bad, really. And then in blue here you see the posterior pituitary directly releases the hormones ADH and oxytocin. So you want to spend a little bit of time making sure you understand this slide, not memorizing the whole slide, but understanding what's happening. So we're starting with the thyroid. And the thyroid, we're going to look at the anatomy of the thyroid. It contains follicles, and the thyroid requires iodine, and it gets that iodine from our food. It is on the anterior surface of the trachea. Below that thyroid cartilage there is, if you touch your finger to your neck, that's your Adam's apple. That will bobble up and down when you swallow. And so below that, you're going to find that fleshy mass, the thyroid gland. And there's two main lobes, and they're surrounded by what's called an isthmus. You can feel that on your own throat. So histology is the study of the tissue, and if you were to look at the thyroid, you would see these large, clear-looking follicles, and then there's other cells in between. Now, the follicle is surrounded by simple cuboidal epithelium, and if you recall, simple cuboidal secretes and absorbs. This follicle is loaded with proteins, which makes it kind of thick or viscous. And the follicle cells are going to secrete a protein called thyroglobulin. This is very vascular. Each follicle is incredibly vascular to transport nutrients, wastes, and the hormones. So in between those follicles, you'll find clear or C cells, and these cells will secrete calcitonin. Calcitonin regulates the blood calcium by lowering it when it's too high. Calcitonin lowers. So the thyroid hormones that we're going to talk about require iodine, and here we can see, okay, so let's look at what this picture is. So here's our follicle, and it's surrounded by those simple cuboidal cells. So there's our simple cuboidal cells, and there's the follicle cavity. So iodine ions are transported into the cytoplasm. Here they are in the capillary, and they're going to go into the follicle cell. Enzymes are going to convert the iodide ions to iodine atoms and attach them to the thyroglobin molecule. There are two hormones. One is called T4 because it requires 4 iodine atoms. One is called T3 because it requires 3 iodine atoms. And both are produced and stored in the thyroglobulin. T4 is called thyroxine. T3 is triiodothyronine, tri-3-iodo-3 iodines. The follicle cells remove the thyroglobulin from the follicles by endocytosis. Lysosomal enzymes break down the thyroglobulin, releasing the thyroid hormones into the cytoplasm. T4 is the most abundant secretion. So T4 and T3 are going to diffuse across the basement membrane and enter the bloodstream. So our blood contains approximately a week's supply of these thyroid hormones. And here's the whole thing. Basically, the iodine enters from our bloodstream and it's converted to the hormones that are then released into the bloodstream, T3 and T4. So here are some of the multiple effects of the thyroid hormones. Increased rate of oxygen consumption and energy consumption, increased heart rate, increased blood pressure, increased sensitivity to sympathetic stimulation, that's fight or flight, maybe you're a little jittery, maintenance of normal sensitivity of respiratory centers to changes in oxygen and carbon dioxide concentrations. So you're very sensitive to the gases. Stimulation of red blood cell formation, so there's more oxygen delivered, stimulation of activity in other endocrine glands, and fast turnover of the minerals in bone. How is thyroxine stored by the cells that manufacture it? As thyroglobulin. What element is particularly required for the manufacture of thyroxine? Iodine. Which of the following hormones will increase in concentration if there is a dietary deficiency of iodine? Thyrotropic releasing hormone. Behind or posterior to the thyroid gland are the 4 tiny little parathyroid glands. And parathyroid glands secrete parathyroid hormone, which increases blood calcium levels. And we don't need to know the histology of the parathyroid. So calcium homeostasis is maintained by both the thyroid gland and the parathyroid gland. Parathyroid hormone increases blood calcium, and the thyroid hormone calcitonin decreases blood calcium. So parathyroid hormone and calcitriol have opposite effects on the blood calcium. And when you remove the thyroid gland, surprisingly enough, it doesn't affect the calcium levels in the blood. So if you look at this, it took me a second to look at this and figure it out, but homeostasis disturbed by increasing blood calcium levels. So the blood calcium levels are going up in the blood. The calcium levels are going up in the blood. Calcitonin is secreted by the C cells to lower the blood. It's going to affect the kidneys, right? What would it do to the kidneys and the digestive tract? Well, the kidneys are going to secrete more calcium in the urine. And our digestive tract is what absorbs the calcium in our diet. So calcium absorption is prevented in the digestive tract, and therefore the blood levels of calcium will drop. So here's just the opposite case. The blood levels are too low, and the parathyroid glands will secrete parathyroid hormone to affect the kidneys, the bones, and the digestive tract. Well, here we have some bone effects here. So the kidneys are going to not secrete the calcium in the urine. It's going to reabsorb the calcium. The bones are going to release calcium from them. That would mean that the osteoclasts are more active in breaking down the bone and releasing the calcium. And then in the digestive tract, there will be more calcium absorption by the digestive tract, and all of these three things will then restore homeostasis, and the calcium levels in the blood will increase. You can pause and read this. What hormone is secreted when blood calcium concentrations drop below normal? That would be parathyroid hormone. What cells are responsible for the production of calcitonin? C, or clear cells. The adrenal glands, the hormones are involved in metabolism, electrolyte balance, and our stress response, which is, they study quite a bit about the stress response and realize how important it is in humans. So the adrenal gland is above the kidneys. There are two of them. They are retroperitoneal like the kidneys. That is, they are not inside the peritoneum, but posterior to the peritoneum, which is the lining of the abdominal cavity. And they're very rich in blood supply. There is a capsule. The outer coating of the adrenal gland is the adrenal cortex. It's yellow because it is storing lipids, especially cholesterol and other fatty acids. And it produces quite a few hormones called corticosteroids. And these affect metabolism. The adrenal medulla, the inner region, produces epinephrine and norepinephrine. Don't be too inhibited by these adrenal gland zones. There's this outer adrenal capsule, and this wide area here is the adrenal cortex, and then the inner adrenal medulla. And you can see that there are three regions of the adrenal cortex: the zona glomerulosa, zona fasciculata, and zona reticularis. Well, the zona glomerulosa secretes, we'll just talk about aldosterone, but it's one of many mineral corticoids, and they affect minerals or electrolytes. And in this case, the aldosterone reabsorbs sodium and water in the kidneys, especially if there's ADH present. So it's reabsorbing water, maybe because blood pressure is too low. There's not enough fluid in the blood. So it's reabsorbing water to increase the fluid and increase the blood pressure. The zona fasciculata secretes glucocorticoids. And you may be familiar with cortisone, but these glucocorticoids are cortisol and corticosterone. And the liver will convert some of this cortisol to cortisone. This secretion is stimulated by adrenocorticotropic hormone, ACTH, from the anterior pituitary. And the zona fasciculata, oh wait, we've talked about that, but the glucocorticoids, gluco, as in glucose, affect glucose metabolism. Increase rates of liver glucose and glycogen formation, stimulate release of amino acids from skeletal muscles, promote lipid catabolism, stimulate release of lipids from adipose tissue. And cortisol also has an anti-inflammatory effect, and that is why people would use a cream of hydrocortisone if they have a bug bite. Anti-inflammatory. The zona reticularis, the innermost zone, secretes small quantities of androgens, which are sex hormones. And these, for a regular adult, they're not going to affect you. But as we age, as say a female ages and her amount of estrogen decreases, she's producing estrogen